popcorn junkies. Here we are. We didn't get time to review episode 3, did we?
Because we were
busy. Separated.
Time.
You were elsewhere, I was elsewhere, which meant we weren't in the same place. That's what it means, separated. Anyway, so episode 3 happened. You and Kooks watched it separately to me, and episode 4. So we're going to review the two of them together. Curious 2 episodes, because there's 0 ghoulies.
Yes.
In either of them.
Yeah.
Which, under normal circumstances, you would think in a sort of zombie apocalypse series.
Disappointing.
Yeah, disappointing, and might not appeal to the core audience. And yet, from what you're saying, all of these characters and the plot developments that we see are in the game. Is that right?
I mean, I don't know for sure, because I never played the game. But,
right. Perhaps you guys know.
I
know the game.
I know that the characters exist in it, but I don't know if they go into as much depth with them in the game. Do you know what I mean? Like Bill and Frank, for example.
Yeah, the gay guy.
I don't know.
Well, this episode 3 introduced Nick Offerman, and he's one of my favourite actors. He's a cracking actor, isn't he? He was he always
a lot of comedies.
Yeah, and he plays a lot of small parts. He's sort of like quite an indie sensibility, isn't he? I presume he's probably a comedian or comes from the stand-up circuit of some form. But he plays. He's always quirky. Like I'm thinking in Me, Earl and the Dying Girl, he played the sort of the dad.
Yeah.
Do you
He's
remember
always a dad.
Yeah, he's always a dad. And he played this sort of curious character that. There was no real explanation as to why we went there, other than this was a man who was fending for himself and lived in quite a nice, pretty sort of picket fence community.
Yeah.
And then constructed, I really like the detail with which he constructed a sort of safe zone with fences and guns and he had CCTV. I wanted to be there. It's safer than Southeast London. Trip switches, traps, so that when and if, ghoulies started coming towards them, he'd see them on the CCTV.
Yeah.
And so we kind of saw him. And what was he called? A prepper. These are the people who prepare for kind of the apocalypse. Yeah. What about being a prepper who's predicted it right?
Yeah.
You're prepared. But then it developed into he catches a guy in one of his traps, a sort of bear trap or monster trap, and then a romance blossoms.
Yes.
I was shocked and surprised by this.
Well, I thought it's very risky by a 3rd episode to completely introduce characters that we we haven't seen yet, and we don't know anything about, and to have us care about them as well in just one episode. That's a difficult thing
I mean,
to do.
it's got to be the strength of the actor to be able to make us care.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I remember, at first when they're introduced, you're kind of like, oh, am I supposed to know who they are? Where do they come into the story? And obviously we found out they come into the story with Joel and Tess, because they were traders and stuff. Yeah. But honestly, I loved that this episode was dedicated to these two. It was very much, well, like I said, a risky thing to do, to just have 2 completely new characters by the 3rd episode, and it kind of just being their
them.
story.
Yeah. But with a moment of Pedro Pascal, because I mean it's very much Pedro Pascal's series, isn't it? And Bella Ramsey's, and all the excitement, all the social media you're seeing. I mean the meme social media aspect of this series, almost more than things like Game of Thrones and other, or The Walking Dead, because The Walking Dead came a bit earlier than that, didn't it? But I only watched half of this to begin with, and then you guys watched the whole episode, and you were kind of like, I wonder if Dad stopped watching it because he was a bit bored and it wasn't kind of, what he was expecting. Yeah. And I paused it because it was late, and then I watched the second half, and I was saying...
And I watched the second half of Dad.
That's right. Oh, yeah. That's right. Already. And I think, and I said this last night over dinner, I think episode 3 of The Last of Us, with these 2 characters who fall in love, was one of the most radical, and I don't know what any gay viewers think, radical representation of male, gay, homosexual relationships in any mainstream drama I've ever seen. And the reason for that, I think, is because they were 2 men who ostensibly, physically and, facially, and weren't, what do they call them? Sort of, conventionally attractive, absolutely. They weren't sort of an idealised version, which I think sometimes TV and film always goes for the sort of beautiful end of homosexual relationships, rather than the realistic end of homosexual relationships. So
it just felt like a very genuine love story, and I think it was just very really beautifully done. And their acting together was
sensational. And Nick Offerman played it beautiful. He's sort of almost, being able to indulge or open up to what his passion was or his love was, and their relationship developing, and his reluctance, and then. It was a lot of fun. I genuinely think this is a tentpole moment in in the representation of gay couples or gay men. I just thought it was remarkable. And so that was that episode, really, wasn't it? It sort of
and then obviously their death, which was very sad.
Well, that's episode 4, isn't it? Is that episode 4?
No.
Oh, it all happened in episode 3.
Yeah.
Oh, of course it did, yeah. So, God, that's a huge story arc.
And that's what I mean. It was so good that they managed to make us care so much about these two people that had just been introduced in that episode.
Yeah.
Made us care so much when they died, and I don't know, we all felt like, and I've spoken to some of my friends who'd watched it as well, and they were saying, I was so invested in them both, why did they have to die? Like, I was so settled into that part of the
world,
story so quickly.
And I was kind of hoping, I mean, obviously I'm disappointed because I love Nick Offerman, and I'm like, oh right, that's him there. I was kind of hoping this would be their sort of safe haven that they'd keep returning to come back to. But that's a kind of testimony, you're right, it did end in episode 3, but it felt like it reached beyond that, and it was sort of more...
But so that third episode was very much their episode.
Very different, very unexpected.
Really liked
it. Yeah. And then episode 4 kicks off, and yet again, we don't really have monsters and ghoulies, though there's always the suggestion of it. I thought one of the things in episode 4 that you commented on, which was particularly good, is the immersive believability of landscape and what they're driving
so well
through.
In this show.
Haven't they?
You can genuinely believe like the whole world is
devastating.
actually that devastating,
Because, you know, you've come out seeing Avatar and you've had that sort of Pandora withdrawal symptoms.
Yes.
And I really believe, you know, when they were driving through the landscape and she saw all the tanks, and then they get to that point on the road and all the cars are mossy and green and there's skeletons. It was really real. I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but
well, it's like we've said before, you know, in films, it very much feels like just what is in shot is set up to, you know,
at the edge of shot it just falls apart.
It feels like the whole world is genuinely
absolutely, they're pushing through a 360 degree sort of world and planet. And this episode 4, a little bit like the last episode, is just about a relationship, isn't it? And I think in a sense both these episodes do what I liked that they did at the beginning of episode 1 and episode 2, which is they are in a sense deepening our relationship. So we got to know those guys who died in episode 3, and in a weird way what that was showing was, look at these really meaningful lives that are ending in this world. And then this episode was about Pedro Pascal and Bella Ramsey's relationship.
They're
really
trying to bring Joel and Ellie's relationship together.
He's sort of becoming more paternal. Right down to the fact that she's got this book, she gets this book at some point which is like full of dad jokes.
She's had a book full of puns,
Puns. I love that. I love the dad jokes because they're so bad. And yet slowly you see Pedro Pascal soften. And then they crash into a sort of resistance.
So the path that they need in order to get to where they need to get to is blocked. So they kind of try and take a route around it, and then they get lost, and then they end up back at the QZ, and there's Fedra people there as well, and they run into a group of people that aren't Fedra or Fireflies. They're kind of their own little...
I get a bit confused with the groups, the pressure groups. Fedra are baddies.
Fedra baddies. Fireflies are the freedom fighters that they call terrorists.
Okay.
And that.
And this bunch were just another bunch.
They're not Fireflies or Fedra, no.
Oh, right.
So obviously we saw that scene with Kathleen, who's the leader of that group.
Yeah, she was a bit
with
dark
the
and
Fedra
twisted.
doctor that she ended up.
He delivered her. He delivered her as a baby, but she still killed her.
Doctor.
There's a brutality to these characters, isn't there? And hang on a minute. We also had the moment where Bella Ramsey essentially almost killed someone. So Bella Ramsey...
she's already killed someone before.
Yeah, so her loss of innocence wasn't now. Her loss of innocence has happened. But Pedro Pascal wanted to kind of nurse her through that. We had a moment with this strange resistance group, clarify who they are, guys, if you know, where they opened the door and the floor was breathing.
Yeah, really
weird. What the fuck was that
I
about?
think it will be fungus underneath.
Do you think?
Yeah.
Giant fungus?
It'll be with the roots.
A giant nanny dye toenail.
Dad, stop with that. It's horrific.
Pushing through the earth. I mean, that was really dark and twisted.
Yeah, that was horrible.
I like the scenes where they were camping together. I like the kind of bromance, but sort of like father-daughter type thing developing. I really like Bella Ramsey.
Yeah, she's really good.
Yeah, she's getting better and better.
Yeah.
She's really settling into the role, isn't she?
Yeah, she is.
And then we have the big kind of cliffhanger.
Yeah. They're held at gunpoint.
It was a short episode, and then suddenly his ground glass on the floor didn't work, did it?
Didn't work. Guess who's sleeping on the side? He can't hear very well.
Oh, of course. And she drew his attention to it. Anyway, my love of Pedro Pascal is deepening.
I love that man.
It's a full man crush.
I have such a crush on Pedro Pascal.
He's lovely.
They've both been very nice kind of settlers in episodes.
Yes.
And last night's one was quite short as well, so it was very much just kind of Joel and Ellie kind of cracking on.
Yeah.
But no, honestly, I loved both. I'm yet to be disappointed with an episode. Don't feel as though I'm going to be.
No, well, and also episode 5 to come, and I think there are 5 more, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. And I'm presuming the kind of drama and the fear and the horror is going to suddenly ratchet up now that we really care about them.
100%.
Well, there you go, guys. Tell us what you think. Are you enjoying it? Did these episodes do it for you?